becomes hotter outside, it can end up driving our appetite down. But why? Let's understand what's going on and then find some solutions and maybe just some expectations around what we can do to really protect ourselves in those kind of moments. So you have probably felt before that sitting in a hot environment, living in a hot environment, that maybe your appetite just becomes suppressed. And it's a normal thing. In fact, there's been really cool studies where people have actually looked at the overall sales of certain food. And you might expect these things. As it gets hotter, sales of things like ice cream, sales of things just like colder meals, just like salads might increase at certain restaurants or stores. Other things though, as it becomes even warmer, even at something like an ice cream shop, you're going to find sales of more quenching beverages to actually increase versus things like the creamier kinds of ice cream. So it's not exactly the fact that it's just a cold meal, but we're actually driven towards certain foods that we might feel can be more comforting for the environment that we're actually in. But again, why is this really going on? And that's what I want you to understand so that you can, again, protect yourself. So let's start here. Remember that the body always wants to really remain protected, and it doesn't want to be overly stressed. It wants to really remain in what we call homeostasis. And so there is something in your body that's really supporting you to make sure that you remain there, and that's your hypothalamus. It's a part of your brain, it's like right behind your eyes. And your hypothalamus is something that will really regulate or just make sure that it can either stop, start, accept or not accept different hormones in your body. One of those hormones is ghrelin, and a lot of our ghrelin, the hormone that drives hunger, is going to be coming from our stomach, our intestines, and some other organs, but it's accepted and actually is stored in some parts of the brain, but the hypothalamus is what actually accepts it. And that's what's gonna maybe regulate our hunger feelings, our feelings of actually being hungry and wanting to actually eat, our desire to eat. But what the hypothalamus also does, it regulates temperature. Our body doesn't want to be overly heated, doesn't want to be overly cold either, right? So it's gonna maybe if we're overly cold, maybe we're gonna shiver. If we're really hot, maybe it's gonna help us sweat a little bit more to cool down. But when we are in a very hot environment, what's actually happening is the hypothalamus is doing all of its work. It's mainly focusing on just making sure that you're not gonna be in a position where you're overheated. So it's gonna do everything it can. It's gonna focus most of its energy, or a lot of its energy at least, on making sure that you don't become overheated. Now, what is something that can actually bring up your body temperature? That's actually eating. So when you eat, you have what is called the thermic effect of food. And so it's nothing crazy, but it's something here where I believe there was one study I saw about is in 1936. It's an old study, but it was looking at how high your body temperature can increase. It looked at some animals, it looked at humans, but one thing in particular, it looked at a beef steak and stewed tomato meal, and it actually increased body temperature by about 2 degrees Celsius. That's also about 3.4, I think if I remember correctly, about 3.4 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're doing something to your body to increase its temperature when it's already hot, the body's going to try and regulate it. So you're going to be almost asked, or at least not driven, to end up eating more. So our appetite becomes suppressed because our body doesn't want to be doing more than it wants to. It wants to regulate itself. It wants to remain in homeostasis. And so that can be all well and good. We want to protect our body, it's perfectly fine. But the only issue here is that when we work with very active populations, say athletes, or maybe someone having goals of just building muscle, needing to eat a little bit more, if we're not eating enough, that can be detrimental. If you're already someone who maybe is at a very low body weight, that can also be a problem. So we just want to be able to know what's coming at us and know why that kind of thing is happening, right? So please understand that this can happen to anybody. And so to make sure that it doesn't become a detriment, just know what to do, what to expect, and how we can kind of get around this, right? Let's make sure that now, what I want you to understand is, number one, please expect and allow for a reduction in your overall food intake. It's not going to be forever, so I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what I want to make sure that you do know is that it will happen. If the temperature in the city is driven up from maybe 60, 70 degrees, a comfortable environment, up to maybe the 90s or 100, right? If anyone right now is in the Pacific Northwest, they probably know what we're talking about, but their appetite is going to be driven down, and the expectation can be good. something we might not want to do is be asking someone to eat more when we're not really wanting to. It can make us feel like we're failing. It can make us feel like just a little bit not so good about it, right? So let's just make sure that we know that that could happen. Just kind of accept that for the moment. Give yourself a little bit of grace. The other thing is expect a shift in the type of foods we may be choosing. And I just kind of mentioned that before, but expect a shift in maybe you wanting to be eating cooler foods, but you also might not be wanting things that are going to drive up your overall body heat. And so protein is going to be one of those. Protein is one of the most difficult foods for our body, in a good way, to actually be digesting. And this is seen usually when we want someone to kind of go through a body fat loss phase. If we can increase the amount of protein, we can keep them fuller longer, and so they're not going to be struggling with hunger. It's also going to help us maintain muscle mass and even recover better from workouts. But we might not be driven to eat those foods, and that's important because in these moments, we want this, number 3 tip, you need to make sure that you're maintaining your protein intake. So you might not be driven to be eating some beefsteak, and you might not be driven to be eating other kind of proteins, especially warm proteins, but make sure that you're thinking maybe keeping some cooler things around. Maybe it could be something like a chilled tuna fish salad. It could be something just like making sure that it's gonna be more Greek yogurt. It could be more protein drinks. But making sure that you know your protein likely is gonna drop, just you're gonna feel that way, we're not gonna be driven to eat it, but then know to still keep it up regardless of the way that you actually feel. Expect this, so plan for it, that's gonna be important. Number 4 is how can we now deal with this moment? And this is maybe more important for a lot of my athletes, my very active individuals. You want to acclimate yourself to the environment. Now, we will naturally do this, just passively, as we live in the city we live in, we're gonna end up acclimating ourselves to the environment, and that's gonna be perfectly fine. What I want you to think about though is if it's a new environment for you, say maybe someone is, I don't know what the temperatures in Tokyo, right? But for the Olympics, if you get there and it's extremely warm, right, you need our athletes still eating, we're gonna wanna make sure that they are going to acclimate themselves well. So we want to slowly acclimate them to a warmer environment, and that's going to be important so that we can now slowly start to get them to be eating the way that they really need to. So starting to get them to work out, kind of perform the way they are in their game or in their main event, slowly get them doing what they're normally going to do. You want to rush into it, but you have to acclimate them to it. You can't keep someone in a cool environment and expect them to perform well once it gets really hot out, because as we end up kind of being in that environment, we can be overwhelmed by it. And so please make sure to set yourself up well, acclimate yourself to the environment, do a little bit more each day, and I think you're gonna be just fine. The other thing here is that a lot of times we're gonna find that athletes or yourself, you might wanna acclimate by jumping into a really hot environment. Great, you've done it well, you're experiencing it, but then you wanna do excessive cooling or extreme cooling. And that can be a problem with ice baths and whatnot. If you do that, you're actually delaying your process of becoming acclimated, and that can be a really big issue for you. So do me a favor, try not to think about jumping into a hot environment and then quickly running inside and kind of getting back to the air conditioning. You're not gonna support yourself well. You're not gonna get your appetite back the way that it really needs to. That also comes along with just minimizing the activity during this gradual heat increase. Personally, I know that myself, the past couple weeks, as it's been warmer, PRs have not been, just personal records, lifting have not really been there for me. And so I know that deloading a little bit has almost been necessary as I'm acclimating to a warmer environment. My gym's been very warm, it's been hot. And so as I'm sweating more, I'm getting acclimated to it, and I know it's gonna come the next few days in terms of just lifting better. So as I get there, I'm gonna give myself some grace, I'm gonna make sure I'm still eating my protein, and I'm gonna expect my appetite to increase, and I'll be just fine. But do me everything you can. Make sure that you are going to set yourself up well with the expectations, know what to do, and know why it's actually happening. So, if you have any questions, let me know. But guys, you got this. Set yourself up well in these warmer months. You got this.